Hey everyone, Wolf Lord Rho here. Today we discuss the meaning of the Codex Astartes. Spoiler warning to begin, as today we will be referencing events from the Warhammer 40k novel Courage and Honor by author Graham McNeill. As always, I really recommend you read the stories for yourself first without spoilers, as that's the best way to enjoy the lore for yourself. But with that said, let's just jump straight in. So yesterday we discussed the Ultramarines' fabled library of Ptolemy, the greatest repository of knowledge across the Eastern Fringe, and honestly probably second only to the vaults of the Imperial Palace itself. And in being a part of the marvel that is the Fortress of Hera, home of the Ultramarines chapter, it's only appropriate that this is the location that the original Codex Astartes is stored. 4-meter-long tomes, penned by the hand of Roboute Guilliman himself. The vast tactical knowledge of his demigod mind, expertly dedicated to his vision of the Adeptus Astartes. His aim to secure the Imperium's survival for the future. From the moment Guilliman, as the Lord Commander of the Imperium, decreed the Codex would be implemented, it has defined the Astartes in every single way, for good and you could argue for bad. Of course, none more so than his own sons, who have upheld their Primarch's legacy through the Codex, by becoming its exemplars thereafter. But it's an interesting question to ponder. What does the Codex mean to the Ultramarines? Is it upheld for simple pride, because it's a responsibility, or something more? It was honestly a question I'd never even considered, until rereading the Uriel Ventris novel Courage and Honor. It's a very question asked of Uriel, by Chief Librarian Togurius no less. Now, through the events of the Uriel Ventris saga, Uriel would find himself exiled from the Ultramarines chapter for a severe breaking of the Codex Astartes. Only by completing a death oath would he have any hope of returning to the chapter. It's an old school series now, set well before the fall of Cadia and the return of the Primarch. And as I've mentioned a few times over the years, it was actually my first introduction to 40k novels, and I've always recommended it particularly for people new or looking to start their dive into the lore and novels. But unbelievably, Uriel and his companion Pausanias would against all odds complete this oath, reaching the home of the Iron Warriors no less within the Eye of Terror. Ultimately found by the mythical Grey Knights chapter, the two would face extreme testing to ensure they were taint-free before being returned to Macragge and their chapter. And even then, the Ultramarines would further test the two once again for any trace of the ruinous power's taint, despite it being the Grey Knights who returned them. For weeks they would face the physical tests of the Apothecarian, the spiritual tests of the chaplaincy, before finally being sent to the Library of Ptolemy to face Chief Librarian Togurius. Within the heart of the library, the guarded Arcanium, they would stand before the original Codex itself, and we'd get a great description of the Chief Librarian. Varro Togurius was an imposing figure, though he stood no taller than would Uriel were he clad in his armour. Rather, it was the depth of knowledge and immense stature his rank and power conferred upon him that made Togurius so vast and terrible. Uriel felt a tremor of fear down his spine at the sight of the librarian, his heavily ornamented armour bedecked with wax seals and carved scriptwork. Wards and sigils of unknown origin spiralled around his gauntlets and across every facet of his battleplate. A set of bronze keys hung on a thick chain around his neck, and his skull-top staff of office seemed to glitter as though fashioned from corpuscent made solid. Tigurius's eyes were infinitely deep pools, bright and glittering with wry humour, though only the librarian ever knew the source of that amusement. His pale skin and sunken cheeks gave his features a sharp angular edge uncommon amongst the ranks of the Astartes. The chief librarian stepped towards them, and Uriel felt his skin crawl at the nearness of this mighty warrior. Though Tigurius had fought with courage and honour for the Ultramarines for hundreds of years, and saved the warriors of the 4th Company on the desolate heaths of Boros, he was no brother as other Space Marines were brothers. His powers and wealth of hidden knowledge ensured that he remained an outsider, even within a chapter of warriors bound by oaths of brotherhood stronger than adamantium. To some, Tigurius was little better than a warlock, a wielder of powers more commonly ascribed to worshippers of unclean spirits or warp witches, while to others, he was a warrior guided by the Emperor himself. What a great little description that is, really bringing to life and evoking the mystic nature of this legendary character, a figure who has dominated the Ultramarines, been by Calgar's side for centuries in the lore, and decades out of it. As long as I've known the Ultramarines chapter, I've known Chief Librarian Tigurius. As much as Marneus Calgar may be the face of the Ultramarines, Tigurius really is equally so, just as iconic. And that mention of him still inspiring a twinge of fear, even in Uriel, a captain who has served beside him for decades. It's a small hint of that divide that will always keep Tigurius apart. As valued and respected as he is, he will always be apart from his brothers, never truly belonging. Yet not for one moment does it alter Tigurius's commitment and devotion to the chapter. Yes, the Space Wolves have my heart, but as I've said before, the Ultramarines 2nd edition Codex was my first ever Codex, and that classic blue and yellow colour scheme back then will always have that swell of nostalgia every time I see it. And Marneus Calgar and Chief Librarian Tigurius will always have a special place in my childhood heart that no one else can quite match. But back to the Codex, Tigurius would reveal to Uriel that the Primarch actually wrote some of the information within as a youth on Macragge. Obviously the more generic military tactics and principles, and not Astartes specific. However, then he would ask Uriel what the Codex represents. And Uriel gives maybe the obvious answer, the simple answer, that it makes us who we are. However, Tigurius is quite clearly looking for something more, immediately asking Uriel why. Why does it make us who we are? Sure, it's an important book, or books, but they're just books, right? Some pages and writing. And this is Tigurius trying to see if Uriel has learnt during his exile, if he has grown. Yes, Uriel survived an unbelievable journey, has been proven to be clear of taint, by the Grey Knights no less. But Tigurius isn't interested in that. What the Chief Librarian is trying to get to the root of here is if Uriel has learnt from the reason for his exile, his punishment, why he was exiled for breaking the Codex in the first place. Because if Uriel doesn't realise that, none of the rest matters anyway. And Uriel responds that it was the teachings of the Codex that was the foundations of the Imperium, that it was the glue that held it all together in the wake of the heresy. Which is exactly right, and an incredibly important statement to consider. How incredibly important the Codex Astartes was to the formulative moment of change for the Imperium. That bridge from the Emperor's vision to its new unknown future. And Tigurius approves of this answer, and so he asks Uriel what it teaches them in particular, the Ultramarines chapter. And this is where things get interesting, as Uriel gives another exact answer, what you would expect, that the Codex lays out the tenets for the chapter's organisation, how it broke down the legions so another Horus could never arise. However here, Tigurius is having none of it, and we get the great line. A Space Marine learns that on his first day within the walls of his chapter house, spat Tigurius. A novice could tell me that. That is what the Codex is, but I want you to tell me what it means. What it means to you, right here, right now. And Uriel is a bit dumbfounded by this, unsure exactly what the librarian wants him to say. But in these brief few passages, we get an understanding of just what the Codex means to the Ultramarines chapter. Think, Uriel, hissed Tigurius, his eyes seeming to flicker with hidden fires. To be in the same room as these relics of a time long gone is to be standing in the presence of history itself. Through these works, a man can reach back to a time when gods of war walked amongst men, and the founder of our chapter led the Ultramarines in battle. It is the keystone of what makes the Space Marines so formidable, said Uriel, with sudden clarity. Without it, we are nothing but gene-bred killers. Go on, said Tigurius. Without the Codex Astartes, the Imperium wouldn't have survived the aftermath of the Great Heresy. It binds every one of the 1,000 chapters of Space Marines together, and gives us a common cause, a connection to the past and to one another. Every chapter, whether they acknowledge it or not, owes its very existence to the Codex Astartes. Exactly, said Tigurius. It is living history, a tangible link to everything we are. And that's why you summoned us here, said Pausanias. To know where we come from is to know who we are and where we are going. Now, I'm not sure I agree with everything in that statement. That the Space Wolves owe their existence to the Codex, for example. However, I get the principle here, the meaning, that it does give that shared cause and bond across chapters, across lineages, regardless of what line a chapter may be, what traditions they uphold. At some point the Codex will give a key piece of connection between them, even if it all just boils down to them both being chapters. It does, in its way, unite every single chapter out there, every single Adeptus Astartes, even with those who have opposed it, such as the Space Wolves chapter. And for the Ultramarines in particular, it is that connection to that bygone era of history, that unbreakable link to their Primarch. As Tigurius summed up, it is living history, a tangible link to everything we are. Everything. To the Ultramarines, the Codex is everything, at least prior to Guilliman's return. In being written by Guilliman, their Primarch, it became them, or they became it, should I say. It became their identity, the two inseparable from the other. And in violating it so, Uriel in his way betrayed everything he was supposed to be. I'm not saying it's right, but just how it was perceived by the chapter then. As Pausanias said, to know the Codex was to know themselves. And although Guilliman upon his return had regrets in some minor ways, of how limited perhaps the Codex had made the Imperium, he would have had undoubted pride in how it was upheld by his sons. the connection and duty to their Primarch, unbroken and upheld over 10,000 years of history. But as always everyone, what do you think? Why do you feel the Codex became so intertwined with the identity of the Ultramarines chapter? Is it only natural it would be that way, given it was written by their Primarch? Or perhaps did they go too far, maybe losing an aspect of themselves to those fabled pages? Now the Primarch has returned. Will there be changes in how the Codex is perceived by the chapter? Will Guilliman alter this perspective? Or do you feel that it's simply too intertwined with everything the chapter is? As Tigurius essentially said, the Codex is everything to their identity. But as always everyone, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Huge thank you to all my subscribers, your support truly means a lot to me, it really does. If you're new, please consider subscribing to help the channel grow. And if you enjoyed this particular vid, then why not drop a like on it too. But with that said, I am off, and I'll see you all again real soon.